I've got my good friend, Mr. Seth Garber. How you doing?
Dude, I'm great, man. Welcome to Tampa.
Well, hey, glad to be here. And so for those of you that are watching on YouTube, no, this is not our new podcast studio. This is not our new set. We're in the new digs, the Pest Daily headquarters. Man, this is awesome.
Thanks, man.
I mean, this has been in the works for a while, this setup, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is, I needed an office to work out of, and it kind of became this.
I mean, this is a pretty sweet office, man.
Thanks, man.
So a little background here with Seth. So this is our 5-year anniversary for Prewett Pest Control when we started our company.
So cool.
And I can't remember how I came across you originally. You've been on the podcast before. It's been a few years, and I can't remember how we got connected, but I'll never forget. I was brand new to the industry, and I'm walking around at my in-laws' lake house talking to you. Somehow we finally connected. And we're talking what I thought was going to be a 10-minute conversation. I think I was on the phone with you for like 2 hours. And I'm like, man, this guy's awesome. Like, you know, you're very progressive in the way you're thinking of like pest control in this industry. And of course, I was an outsider coming in. And now it's like we look up and it's been 5 years, 4 or 5 years since we've known each other. If you don't mind, just tell the listeners who may not know who you are or may not come across Pest Daily, kind of give us your background and tell us about your history.
Yeah, and at the highest level, I mean, it's kind of a unique background, right? And so, I was a corporate sales guy. I worked at Cintas, #1 sales rep in the nation, and the head of operations at our branch said, "Hey, let's go start our own company." And I was like, "I'm not entrepreneurial. Why would I do that? Like, who cares?" I was making good money, and then he walked in and handed me $2,500 in singles. And so let's do it. And we fell on pest control. So we had a bit of pest business. We built it up over 4.5 years. One of the fastest growing companies in America. Ended up selling the business. When I sold the business, it changed my entire life. We did really, really well there. After that, I went into healthcare, ended up becoming the CEO for Build & Company, the leading post-acute healthcare consulting firm during my non-compete time. Did that for several years, scaled it up, and then did a couple of tech companies back to back, which ultimately led us into, kind of finding my passion, which was building pest control companies again. And so we started coaching pest control companies in 2017 for fun, and launched Pest Daily in like 2020, like end of 2020.
About the time we started our company, right?
Yeah. And so we did that, and fast forward till today, we support 1,900 pest control companies in Pest Daily. We have a consulting firm that has over 100 clients. I'm a partner in FRAXN, one of the top CPA firms, and I'm in private equity too. So it's kind of crazy. And I think about it's been a crazy run, man. So I guess we know how to build a pest control business today.
And you know how to build a cool office spot here too. I mean, this is awesome, man. And I think that's what I really appreciated first conversation we had, because of me coming from completely outside of the industry. And of course, everybody listening, most people are like, they didn't intend to get into pest control necessarily, unless they were second generation. And it seems like the cool stories I hear about people getting into the industry is so neat, how they got into it. Now they've gone on to this or started their own company. And same with you. And I guess I'd forgotten about the Cintas background and then started that company.
Yeah.
So you got, when was that? When did you guys start that company and when did you sell it?
So we started the business in called the end of 2007, beginning of 2008. And then it was sold in 2012.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was a short run, an intense run, a fun run. But that's what we did. Yeah. I mean, we didn't know anybody in the pest industry. I mean, I always joke that, I hear everyone talking about 20 years experience, 30 years experience. Like I owned a pest control company before I ever did a pest control service.
Right.
Which is kind of crazy, taking a step back and looking, but that's how we did it, man. Yeah. So, walked down the street, sold a bunch of commercial business, and that's how we started. And it was crazy.
Well, I think one of the ways I came across you, and I share this all the time for the listeners that have heard this back in early episodes back in 2020, if you looked at my search history in Google, and no, this is not dirty, but if you looked at my Google search history
not this one, right?
Yeah, that's right. In 2019, it was like how to start a pest control company, what capital is required to start a pest control. If I don't know anything about pest control, can I start it? I mean, all these things. And then I'm like Googling, all right, pest control consultants, pest control training, whatever. And I think that somehow I came across Pest Daily.
Yep.
and then started watching your videos. And a big part of our success with the insurance business in previous years was doing coaching and consulting in what could be perceived as expensive in the long run is a phenomenal return on investment.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know at the time that you guys were doing consulting. I just knew the Pest Daily piece of it. And it wasn't until a few years later that, that we started doing some consulting together. And I think you flew up to Auburn to spend some time in our office. That's been a few years ago too, right?
Yeah. It's amazing.
So you've seen our journey. It's been kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's been, it's pretty interesting. I mean, I think you guys took a really unique path, right? And like you you did something that I always love is you put your name on it, right? And I think when you put your name on something, like it has to win. Like it just has to win, right? And I remember being there in Auburn, hanging out with y'all, and I was like, man, these guys have got to win. This guy's name is on the front door, right?
That's right. So you take all the good, the bad, the ugly. There's no hiding from when your name's on it. It's not like Pest Control Pros, Pest Control, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got the name, which is good and bad, I'm sure. But one thing I want to talk about today, because there's so many different things we could talk about today,
Sure.
and just love the fact that you're having us here to spend some time with you in this cool setting. But I think a lot of times as I'm talking to listeners or friends in the industry, operators, whether it's a one-man show or even a 50-man company, right? You really realize there's a big need, I think, in education for people really understanding KPIs for their business, key performance indicators, but really as it relates to financials. And so I go back probably about 2 years ago before you guys started FRAXN. I remember distinctly being down here. It's one of those things like, Seth, I'm driving down, I'm flying down. I need to here's this hot thing I need to come talk to you about. And you're gracious to allow me to come down and I'm like, dude, I'm struggling financially. I've got an accountant that we're doing this stuff with, but they don't really understand the industry. And I'd use someone else in the industry who specializes in pest control, but that wasn't a great relationship. And I remember you telling me hey, I may have a solution for you. And I had no idea what you were talking about. I don't think you could tell me at that point.
Yeah.
But then along came FRAXN, and it really solved a lot of the issues that I know I was having as far as understanding my numbers and financials for really any business, but it's really tailored to the pest control industry.
Yep.
Would you share with us what inspired FRAXN, FRAXN, FRAXN?
Yeah.
What inspired that, and how would you describe that company?
I think the interesting thing is if you put yourself in a seat like I was in and my team was in, we're constantly looking at businesses. And our job was to improve the business. Now, whether the purpose was to improve the business to make them grow faster and be on the PCT 100, or if it was to drive profit, because not all businesses care about profit. I know it sounds crazy, but
Sure.
some don't. It was very, very difficult to evaluate companies in a systematic way, right? And so we would look at some of the industry accountants, and their stuff was good. But what we saw more or less was that everyone was kind of doing accounting differently. And so what would happen is for our organization, we would look at these businesses and go, look, it doesn't really make sense. We can't get the numbers to make logical sense. However, you talk to the M&A companies, you talk to Potomac and these guys, and they have a very systematic way they do it.
Yes.
But they have to do the work, right? They have to get it to that system. And so as you started thinking about it, I was like, wait, what if, and Patrick and I had long discussions. We said, what if we could get a way to easily look at all companies the same, right? If we could, then from that perspective, we knew that we were to a GAAP standard from an accounting practice, so that everything was done the same. But then we know, hey, here are the 10 or 12 levers that we can pull as a consultant. So that's what we did, right? And so we made it stupid simple. So, so if you went down the list of the things is what are most important, right? Well, everybody in business is going to have hits this end of life, right? Not end of life necessarily personally, but end of life in business. So either A, you're going to sell the business, B, you're going to create a succession plan, or C, you're going to go raise a bunch of capital and go into PE or whatever else, right? But at the end of the day, that's what's going to happen. If the accounting wasn't done correctly, you never really could find out what your value levers were.
Right.
And that was our challenge, because every company was looking at different. So when FRAXN was built, the real purpose was look, what's a big driver? And at the time, it was revenue quality, right? And so it was your percentage of recurring to your percentages of one time. huge number. So what is your percentage of recurring? Huge important thing. Obviously, revenue is a big important thing. But if you go down and you look at the driving KPIs, is that you have your current ratio, right? So how much cash do you have?
Right.
You have your gross margin, which is obviously your absolute measure of efficiency.
Yes.
You go down and you look at your accounts receivable days, and there's several others, but if you could look at those systematically, now we know where we need to drive the business, because those are the real business drivers. And so if you understand how to get to those numbers, now you can start to look at your expenses and start to dial it in to become more of industry standard.
Right.
My vision as we progressed, which I think people who are in that platform, or whether they have a different company, is that I stopped thinking about what is an industry average, and I started saying, hey, what if we can produce, what does a top producing company do? And I think that that's a big problem in our industry, is that we always talk about what's an average. Well, an average is average, right?
Right.
But if you're going to be the best, like, what does that really look like?
Who are you benchmarking yourself against?
Correct. Right? Because it's always like a big, and again, like there has to be some standard, right? And so there's lots of great reports that have hundreds of companies in them, and that's great, but that's average, right? And so I started saying, hey, what if we had that document, right? Like, and then I could actually start to say, hey, what if we could get to these numbers? What if we could get to these numbers? What if our revenue per tech could be 30,000? What if our revenue per employee could be 16,000? Like, how does that really impact the business? And so we started trying it, and it started to work. But that's why FRAXN existed. And ultimately to say, hey, how do we create the most valuable businesses in the world? Not how do we create the most average business?
Right.
And that's what we did.
Absolutely. And to your point, I think it's knowing what benchmarks are, knowing what I mean, at least somewhere to start. Like, what should my profit be? Number one, how many of us as business owners out there are really looking at financial reports in an organized way to where it makes sense to know, like, are we going to hire our next hire, let's say maybe for a technician, are we doing it out of emotion, or are we doing it with data that tells us a story? Now there's going to be that emotional, aspect of it, but like, if we know what our budget, like, how do we come up with a good budget? Like, what should technician labor be as a percentage of revenue? Well, if we don't have good financials, how can we make those decisions, right? How often do you see people in this industry making, big decisions, or just kind of like fly by the seat of their pants because they don't have a good, they may have their local accountant, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but there's something of value for someone knowing our business, right, in this industry. Like, how often do you see operators out there that are using kind of the local?
So Rusty, that's a really good question. And I would tell you this, it's such an important thing that comes up, is that we actually have internal training for our internal, like, project leaders on how to actually handle this situation. Because one of the things that we see is it's not so much like they have a local guy who doesn't know what they're doing. It's that there's not a standard to the way they're doing it. So we can pull those numbers apart and look at them the way we want. The bigger issue that we face is that it is emotional. And so, because what happens in our industry, and most people experience it, is that the technicians are saying, hey, I'm too busy. Office team is saying I'm too busy all the time. But when the rubber really meets the road, they're not that busy. They don't understand what proper utilization looks like.
Right.
And that's what we see more. And so I think one of the core responsibilities that we have to do on a regular basis is we have to teach how the emotion doesn't matter. And so I'll use a technician as an example in a general market. Now, some markets are going to be a little different, but a lot of times people say, hey, when do I hire my next technician? Okay. And then the very first question that we would ask, and let's say it's just to paint the picture, say it's a sub $3 million business. And so they only typically hire one technician at a time at that size, right? And so they say, well, when should I hire my next technician? And so the very first question we ask is this: well, what's most important to you? And they go, oh, well, we want to make as much money as we possibly can. Great. In that scenario, if they're focused on profit, then great. Maximize the routes, build the routes up 10 or 15% over what you want your average revenue to be per route, and then hire your technician, not based on the way you feel. Because if it's on feeling, then you have a bunch of $15,000 routes and everyone's been emotional about it. Where my preference is, hey, we're looking at a bunch of $25,000 routes.
Right.
People might be under a little stress, but that's okay, because now we can keep the profit where we need to be. So they actually have the money to expand the business. So, but that's across the board. And so there's different models and different ways to consider that, even outside the P&L, that makes it a little easier for people.
Absolutely. And one thing I learned from working with you guys and really starting to study, financials, a profit and loss statement, is, your gross profit margin, right? And look, my previous career with Allstate, we just got a commission check, right? They just, we got, it was really, there was no cost of goods sold. There was no, like, we had our office expense, our salesperson expense, our marketing, our rent, stuff like that. But like, we didn't have materials, we didn't have technician labor. And so that was new to me in this industry, right? And trying to figure that out. And what I think I've realized and what I've been educated on by yourself and others is that's where you can really control your bottom line, take home profit, right? Looking at your gross profit. So talk about that. Talk about when you're looking at a profit and loss statement for those that may be looking, all right, hey, this makes sense. We need to work with a company like FRAXN. What are the key things you look at that can drive profit in a company?
Yeah, well, there's a lot, right? There's a lot. And so that's a big, broad question. It's a great question. And so I'll walk you through how, and I'll use a P&L that I understand. I'll use a P&L that I know is organized correctly to give you a better answer. So if somebody comes to me and they say to me or any of our operational team members, but if they come to us and say, look, we're not making enough profit, okay? Is that it's a very simple process. So we look at their P&L, okay? The very first thing we look at is what I brought up earlier is your revenue quality. And also seasonality. So if somebody comes to us in October, November, in a mild market where it might be getting cold and they're not making enough money, it's very simple. We look at their revenue quality. If their revenue quality is mostly one time versus recurring, we know clearly that they're going to struggle the rest of this year. And we also know clearly what steps to put in place so that 18 months from now, not immediate, that we can actually create enough cash flow through recurring to cover them through the winter. Okay, so 18 to 24 months. Very first thing we look at. After that, I jump right to gross margin. I skip everything else and I look at the percentage of gross margin. If gross margin is sub 55%, I immediately know that there's an operational efficiency issue, right? Now, operational efficiency might be routing. Operational efficiency might be technician pay. It might be a lack of focus on starts. It also could be simply pricing.
Pricing, right.
Right. And so I look right at that number and everyone says the same thing. So we'll look at a number that's like 52, 53, 54%. And they're like, I heard that that's really, really good. It's not good. It's below average, right? And so if that number's in the mid 60s, 70s, we know that we can probably scale that business up pretty quickly. And it's that clear. After that, we just go below the line, which is, everything below gross margin. And then we can clean that up. And there's all kinds of stuff that comes in that makes that company more profitable. All kinds of stuff. And historically, if they come to us and they're not making enough money, typically their cost of sale is just too high, or like they're just paying people too much money. Because inherently, especially timing now, what we've seen is that coming out of COVID is that there's all these crazy pay scales with companies that have kind of bled through. And a lot of them don't have standards around what their pay scales really look like. They say, oh, Rusty, you're a good technician. Hey man, how much do you make? You tell me you make $23 an hour. Okay, great. I'll give you 24. Well, then you come to somebody else that's 25. Now you're back at 26. Meanwhile, in that market, it might be 1850. And so those are easy to clean up. And most of that is more of how do you communicate to the owner on how the communication should work with the team. And ultimately, but those are the things we tend to look at. Like, and frankly, if somebody put a P&L in front of me or any of our team leaders today, like in seconds, we can tell them what they need to focus on. If they're using FRAXN, it's even easier because it's super organized,
Well, and to your point is the standardization of, again, just it starts with a chart of accounts.
Yeah, exactly.
For everybody listening, if you your local account, you're probably using some form of QuickBooks or something. Yep. And I've seen just through potential acquisitions that we look at in small businesses or large, depending if it's a local accountant, depending on how they calculate gross profit, what they calculate cost of goods sold could be completely different than the next guy over here. And so the standardization, I think, is huge. And so in order to make business decisions by leaning on yourself for best practices in the industry, we have to have some sort of standardization to know like gross profit, like what is gross profit? Like what do you consider? So explain just, at a high level, simple level, like when you talk about cost of goods sold, so you got a revenue, right? If you're watching this on YouTube, you're seeing me do my hand motions here. Like in my mind, I'm looking at a P&L starting from top to bottom. So we have our revenue. We've got our cost of goods sold or cost of sales, and that gives us our gross profit, right? What do you determine goes in our cost of goods sold to determine that gross profit?
Yeah, it's a very simple answer. Now, different companies are going to have different things because of different services or whatever, but it's a very simple thing. So anything that goes into making that service happen goes into that number. That's it. And so there's a lot of different nuances to it. And so where the mistakes that we see get made is that people will add expenses that should not be there into those numbers, or alternatively, they will pull stuff out and put it below the line. And so it's very, very indicative, or there's a very straightforward way of actually seeing it. And so companies either, if a person takes a look at their P&L today, is that either it says you're like 95% or 100% gross margin,
Yes.
like it's being done incorrectly,
Right.
right? And you've seen it all the time.
I've seen 2 of them in the last 2 months.
And so it's really simple. So like to solve this problem is either A, you use an industry standard company, or somebody who truly understands what the numbers are, who understands a GAAP practice, or B, you're not. And that's not selling our product. It's just saying that that's the truth, because it doesn't make sense to leave it up to choice. But I think to answer your question, it's very simple. Anything that goes into providing the service goes there. Anything that provides in selling the service goes below the line. Right. And that's the easiest way to describe it to people that aren't comfortable.
Yeah. So for example, your materials, your chemicals, your technician labor. So you pull up to the house, pull out of the truck, pull your backpack spray or whatever to apply product. I mean, that's all part of it.
Correct.
So your office rent, is that part of that? No, right? So that's below the line. Your marketing expense,
below the line.
Google ads, whatever, below the line, right? Your insurance, your car insurance for your, trick question here. You already know the answer.
Yeah.
So I've got an auto policy. I've got 3 managers, right, on their auto policy, and I've got 7 technicians or 17 technicians, right? Do we segment that out?
It's a tough question, and I would tell you that I know what my preference is, and I know what the right thing is. I would tell you that companies make that decision on their own a lot of times. How do you guys do it?
I think at some point we were segmenting it out, and then at some point you're like, you know what? We'll figure this out later. You can get so detailed. I can get real detailed in the weeds sometimes.
Yeah. So I think the other thing is I also see people do this, and sometimes that's a very tough question, and companies do it differently. Sometimes I see people put things in a gross margin, and they go, it just should be there because it might be part of it, right? And I'm actually okay with that. And I'll tell you why. Because if they're a company that's focused on efficiency, if they have stuff that's a little bit like some stuff that might not be there, they actually push for becoming a more efficient business because they're trying to push that number up. Yeah. And so sometimes we can let that stuff go. But yeah, we see some odd stuff, man. We see some odd stuff. And I think if Cameron was here, or some of the team over there was here, I think that they would debate that. And I think that they would be right, and we would probably still debate them on that specific subject.
But at the end of the day, as long as we're tracking it, we know where our numbers are. What do you put above or below the line? At least being aware of where it goes. I think just being aware gives you an opportunity to know what should a budget, or again, to your point, if I want to shoot for a 60, our goal right now as a company is 67% or higher for our gross profit.
Oof,
and that was a few years ago. We were just trying to get to 50.
Yep.
And I remember, when we first started, I had a director of ops that we hired who had been in the industry, and I'm being told hey, we need to go hire another technician, and I'm like, really? Man, my gut just seems like we're good. Doesn't feel like we need any. And no, the guys are getting burned out, and then we made a change in that role, and I go meet with all the guys, and this is a real life example. I went and met with one of our technicians. We call them service pros, service professionals, and I sit down with him doing a one-on-one, and I'm like, tell me about your job here. You've been here now for 6 months. What do you think about it? He's like, oh man, Rusty, it's great here. I love it. I'm like, that's awesome. That's great to hear. I'm like, well, what makes you love it? He's like, man, I usually get started about 8:30 every day, and I kind of go get my stops in. I got my guaranteed salary, and I usually knock off about 2:00, and I go home, and I get to go do this and that. And I'm like, boy, you work basically from 8 to 2. He's like, well, I mean, some days I work until 4:00. He's like, some days I'm done by 11. I'm like, so we're paying a flat salary, but my point is, it was an emotional decision to go hire another technician when it wasn't needed. We needed to give these guys an opportunity to make more money, put them on production-based pay. And so now when we can look at our labor percentage as a percentage of revenue, we sort of have a budget to know, like what do you typically find if I'm doing $1 million in top line revenue for my company? What would you say is a general range using like technician labor as a rule of thumb? Like,
so it depends on the way they're paying the technicians, right? But I would say like I like to see that number in like the 25-ish ballpark-ish, like, and that may be high, it may be low for some companies, high for others. A lot of companies are like, hey, we're okay with 30. I like to see it a little lower. So yeah, what do you guys target?
I mean, I think we've ranged anywhere from 17 to 20% as a percentage of revenue, and that includes our base, our production pay, our payroll taxes, health insurance, and when we roll that all into kind of direct labor, just on that.
Yeah, I think the companies, and I would agree with you. So I think what I'm describing here is that I see these companies paying a lot. And as I kind of brought up at the very beginning, is like those companies can be fixed, not necessarily just on that though, right? But no, I mean, I agree with you. I think 17, I don't see a lot of companies in 17, but we definitely see them around 20.
And it also depends on your pricing, right? So like if I'm charging, this customer over here, their average annual, recurring value, let's say is $280 for quarterly pest control. I'm going out 4 times a year, charging $70 or $80 per service stop versus this company over here is charging $140 per service stop. And yeah, you can expect your labor percentage to be lower. It's going to be higher if someone's not priced correctly. And that kind of leads me into ultimately one of the reasons we want to talk today in this podcast. We want to start with the KPIs and just knowing your numbers, right? And using a company like FRAXN, and there may be one other company that I know out there that I would say sort of specializes in that space. Obviously, I'm a little biased towards you guys, but because you guys are killing it in your software. I mean, everything is just amazing. It's modernized. It's been able to benchmark against other companies to see, like, we don't know specifically these other companies, but with the reports. And I want to get into talking about price increase. But now that I just mentioned that, that's a pretty powerful tool with what you guys do. Will you talk about that?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So over the years, there's always been like a report or multiple reports, and it's always like the average. And I think you heard me talking about it a little earlier, but the thing is that average doesn't matter to me. Like I hate average. I don't want to think about it. And so one of the uniquenesses that we do have is that we do have the ability to benchmark against region, against companies of similar size or database as a whole. And so if you think about the companies who are progressive, who want to use the kind of programs that we have, like if you want to go look at the region in I think I don't know if we go just Alabama, but like regionally, like companies in like the Southeast, like you can see how people are actually performing, and you can see every component, right? So you can see all of your different KPIs. You can see all of them and compare like how are you really doing, and then it'll put you in the percentile. And so if you want to look at average, cool. If you're the average of that group, okay, you're average. But then you can also see what the best people are doing,
right?
And that's something that I've never seen a way to create transparency around that. And then we can also do it based by service type. So like if you're pest control only, termite pest control, lawn and ornamental plus, you can see all those things, because sometimes I think a lot gets lost in translation because they're pushing all these different service types together.
Right.
And so, but we do have all those capabilities, and it's a pretty powerful tool. And I would tell you that I hear, especially in our coaching operations, like I definitely hear people that are like, oh man, who's this guy that's doing this? Or who's the guy doing that? Like guys, like we can't tell you.
We can't disclose that.
Yeah, we can't tell you. Like, hey, if you happen to run into the guy who's telling you he's number one, just know that that's the guy, But it's pretty interesting.
But yeah, I mean, because to your point, number one, so for our listeners out there, if you're not tracking, if you don't have good financials, if I ask you, hey, what's your gross profit margin typically, on average, if you don't even know what that means, I think this is a good time to self-reflect and say, okay, well, I've got a business, I'm supporting my family, I'm supporting a family of others. I probably need to take time to understand what this means. Number one. Number two, I probably need to find a company or an accountant, someone who can put it in a format so I can now make informed business decisions on how to run my business, right? Like, should my chemical cost be 10%, 5%, or 25% of my revenue, right?
Yep.
Am I out of line here? Well, how do we know that if we don't have a good set of financials?
Yeah, I think the important part here, and it doesn't. I've seen it come as all sizes. Is that what it really comes down to? Is you're either running a checkbook business, which says, "Hey, I've got enough money to pay my bills,"
Yes.
or you're running a business that you can grow up. And too often in our industry, and again, size doesn't matter. We've got clients that are in the $30 million range who the CEO runs like a checkbook, and if he's got money in his account, we're buying more stuff. If he doesn't have money in their account, like we're slowing down, and these are big numbers, right?
Sure.
But I think that is really the understanding, to your point, of like, hey, my company makes X. I then take money out of company X and I put it into my personal life.
Mm-hmm.
And then I make personal decisions. But too often what we do is we say, hey, we've got X amount of money in our business, and that makes our personal decision for us.
Yes.
And as soon as people start to kind of disintermediate like their company's income versus their personal wealth, like the sky's the limits. And very, very few people do it in our industry, in all honesty.
So it's like thinking, like you think of yourself, all right, yes, I'm a stockholder of my company,
Exactly.
my LLC, but I'm also an employee. I'm paid with a wage for my employee, as an employee, but then I'm an investor or I'm a stockholder. So how do we distinguish the two? So we have to look at this. Look, it's easier said than done, right? Most of us are owners and operators, and you wake up and you just want to go put out fires some days.
Yeah.
You don't have time to look at it that way. So all this kind of leading into, a topic, we talked about last night at dinner.
Sure.
Something I think this is probably one of the most important topics I talk about with, listeners, friends, as it relates to the value of their business or the profitability of their business. I mean, we've bought, a few companies, small to anywhere from 10,000 in recurring revenue to $500,000 over the last few years. Right? And a very common thing I see is pricing issues as it relates to, the first business I bought. I'm looking, all right, what's the recurring revenue? I'm going to pay a multiple of recurring revenue, right? And I'm going to pay X of the recurring revenue. If it's $500,000 in recurring, I'm going to pay 1 time or 2 times or whatever. But what I did not know at the time, what really matters is like, okay, you may have 100% recurring revenue in that business you're buying, but if it's not profitable business, meaning they're not charging enough for that service, they're not making money, right? Yep. So I think knowing like pricing wise, like when do we make price increases? Like I remember, with this particular first business we bought, when we went in and we said, hey, we're going to have to make some adjustments to pricing. This guy was charging about $60 per quarter for pest control, right? So that's $240 in annual revenue per customer. And like our pricing model, we're at like $430. And we're going 3 times a year versus he's going 4 times a year. And that's the difference between making money or not. So kind of walk us through pricing and how it relates to that.
Yeah. So I've got a couple of core beliefs around this. And when we started talking about these years ago, people thought we were crazy. Now we're years down the road, and like in ultimate, it's worked out, right? And so I think depending on where the company is that I always think about what is my average value per service, regardless of whether we're doing subscription billing, regardless of whether we're doing fee for service. I always think about that. And if I look back years ago, and markets are different, right? You happen to be in a market that prices are actually lower compared to other markets in the country, which is just an anomaly of your market, right? And so we always try to target. So we used to say, hey, like let's get $120 per service. Let's get to that number, right? Which probably makes sense in markets like in your market. And then we started going up and up and up in other markets. And we said, all right, well, what should we really be doing, taking into account like all the operational costs of these companies? And so we fell on like $175 per service is the number that we try to get to. Some we have higher, some we have lower. And that's if I thought about the market as a whole. And so if the companies aren't there, and now if it's a 1-man operation or 2-man operation, it doesn't really matter. Right. They just have to pay their bills. But as the company starts getting to $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million, $3 million, we want to get to that number, $175 per service. And so if a company's not there, we know that we have to increase price, okay? But my core belief is that even if a company's there, is that as businesses, we're actually obligated to raise prices. This is what I was saying last night.
Yes.
And we should never be scared. And we have, I don't know what the exact number is, but like if I looked at the last call it 12 months. Let's just say like we've probably overseen, and I'm going to make up a number here, probably 4 million consumer households price increases, probably something like that, right? And we have to do it, right? And so the businesses have to, because businesses are getting more expensive to operate, not even just inflation, they're just more expensive.
Sure.
And so I think the other component related to it is like the chemical companies as an example. Like, dude, these guys are just raising prices like crazy arbitrarily.
Right.
And these happen. So everything becomes more expensive. And so I think like from my perspective is, first off, if we want to keep it in the most simple format without job costing and figuring out what our real cost is, like if we can get to $175 per service, that's great. So it doesn't matter if it's subscription, fee for service, whatever that looks like, right? In most markets. And then the other component is that every single year we've got to raise prices, and we have to raise them a lot more than we think we should. The numbers I was giving you last night are deadly accurate. This past year for companies that were sub 20 million in revenue, right? And the reason is the number of customers is that our price increases were between 12 to 15% this year across the board. There may have been a couple that were a little lower because of other price increases. If the companies were larger businesses, we targeted between 8 to 10%. And we effectively were able to do that across the country with very limited churn. And so I think this all really, really makes a big difference. And so I think to your initial question is, how should they think about it? Keep it super really simple first. Hey, if you're a sub $500,000 company in a tertiary B market, you need to get to about $135 to $150 per service. If you're in a bigger market, you need to be $175 per service. If you're not, you're undervaluing your service. Is that an easy way to sum it up for you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just to even kind of go a little bit lower, from an explanation standpoint, just so people really understand what you're saying. I call it revenue per stop. So same thing, right? So just picture, for our listeners, picture whether, how many, look at your service frequency, like how many times, just for general pest control, how many times am I going out per year to service them, right? If it's quarterly pest control, I'm going 4 times a year. So if I'm charging $80 per quarter, right, I'm getting $80 in revenue per stop, right? Whereas if I go, if I'm going 6 times a year, right, and I'm, what am I charging in revenue per stop? And so I think that's where the account it could be a $600 annual revenue account, but if you're going 12 times a year, your cost every time you pull up to that home, your technician labor, your chemical cost, I mean, it's pretty much going to be the same whether you go 12 times a year or 4 times a year. And I think that's where so often I see people make a mistake in not adjusting their pricing. Your revenue per stop, you said 135 or more. So that means, okay, well, I may need, in that logic, I need to be charging $135 per revenue stop, whether I go 6 times a year, 4 or 3 times a year, right? So as it relates to maybe your 1 or 2 man shows, how are they able to justify it? I think it's typically because they're really paying themselves as the technician, not necessarily as the business owner, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a bigger thing we have to think about in our industry, and this is what people forget, right? Is what is the business of pest control? Like, what is pest control? And I'm asking it rhetorically because, like, if you think about what the way we make money in this business, we don't make money by providing the best service. We simply don't. And I know that sounds crazy, and I'm sure people are going to say that's POS and whatever, but we don't. We make money by showing up at some frequency, swiping a credit card, and billing customers, and then that money building up over time. That's how we make money. And so a lot of times what we see is companies go, oh, it must be every other month, right? And they're willing to decrease their costs because they're there more frequently. Right? And it's actually counterintuitive. And so we're actually better off, to your point, of going to, instead of 6 times a year, go 3 times a year and just play the insurance policy of, are we going to get service calls? We're in a much better place that way to build much, much more successful businesses. But we've inherently been taught that, hey, you have to be there more frequently. You've got to put more product down. But the reality is the less product, the better, the less frequency, the better, and the higher the price, the better. That actually allows us to provide a better service.
Absolutely. And I would also argue that, we do triannual service. So we're going out every, 3 times a year. And talking with mentors when we set this up 5 years ago, you look at the service callback frequency quarterly versus triannual. There was actually very little difference from the people that advised us to potentially look at this. But it's not about that. It's about how you react when they call.
Exactly.
How quick are we out there? Are we showing urgency to the customer? And And that's really what the customer cares about in most situations. As it relates though to pricing, and we are no exception to that at Prewett Pest Control. Let me be the first to tell you, when we first started, let's go in and set a price, right? We do monthly billing. So we were able to set that up in the beginning. And so we said, all right, $25 a month for pest control. We're going to do triannual service, right? So, that's how we set it up. And then pretty quickly, I'm like, we can always raise our prices. So within 6-12 months, right now we're $30 a month. Well, now just for a standard service, we're $36 to $38 per month, right? But what I found was we did not have a good system for having price increases built in.
Yep.
And again, I come from the insurance world where Allstate just arbitrarily, raises rates on someone's car insurance based on claims activity, severity, market conditions, right? Those things, inflation. So one thing I know we're working on, maybe you can give some insight on this, is if we set someone up on monthly billing right now at $36 a month, and this is a field routes question we're working through now, how do we have it to where after 12 months, after 1 year anniversary, an automatic price increase happens a year later? And it's just automated. So we're not having to think about it. Because the reality is we did a price increase, a $3 a month price increase, and we saw 5 customers leave us.
Right.
I mean, so how do we systematize that? Because we have not done a good job of that in our own company.
Yeah, I mean, from a technology standpoint, it's actually fairly easy. The more important part is from the business process, the decision has to be made. I think as a leader, and I know you're way past this in the way you think about it, is that the people are scared to raise prices. They're super, super scared.
Yeah.
And the simplest way, and you've heard this 1,000 times, the simplest way is, let's say we raise price by 10%, right? Let's say that we lose 9% of all of our customers. You actually just became a tremendously better business, right? And so I think people have to just not be scared. And I would tell you, in the majority of all the companies that we've built over the years, they systematically raise prices, same time of year, every single year. And we typically do it, it just depends. Like there's 3 or 4 different methods, but it's the same. And it's always, now, one of the things we did for the first time this year is we actually did adjust it, but typically it's a standard number. And it's a lot. Like we never go, oh, let's raise by 2% or 3%, because it actually doesn't benefit the business to do that. And so if we're going to raise prices, we like to raise it a lot. And we do. And so, but to your point, it's just part of the process. It's no different than how do you onboard a technician, or how do you onboard a CSR? It's, hey, depending on the market, that the second you get that north of 70-degree weather, if that's consistent in your markets, what usually is, that's when you raise prices.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yep. As soon as it gets warm, you raise prices. And so like in your market, it's probably April, right? Probably
That's
April.
right.
Yeah. So April, you raise prices. If you're a fee for service business, you raise prices at the next service over like a 3-month period. If you're a subscription company, you raise them all. Yeah. And the only thing that we are careful of is that if they've signed up within the last year, we tend not to raise prices. This year, we've been doing it. And I'll tell you this, it's been an incredible result. And so the people historically has always been, hey, if they haven't been a customer a year, don't raise prices. And we raised them anyway this year on a lot of markets, same exact result. Hardly any cancellations, no issue at all, brought more revenue into the business.
And I think, at surface level, it seems, oh, you're just being greedy. You're trying to squeeze, and I would argue differently. I know we talked about this last night. I think you're actually doing your customers a disservice and your employees, mainly because I've just seen it so many times with other businesses I've seen where they have not raised prices since they started the company 3 years ago, 5 or 12 years ago. So now they think they're being greedy by doing it, but now their margins have gotten so small. Now they can't go hire good people because they can't afford them, right? And so if they need to be paying someone $40,000 a year, now they're going to pay someone $25,000. They're getting the bottom of the barrel talent out there, which means the customers aren't getting the proper service. And more often than not, I'm seeing these guys struggling when inflation hits like it has in the last few years, where now they're on the verge of potentially going out of business. And now, like, if they had these price increases, consistently, and more importantly, I think, wrapping your brain around, like, you conceptually have to, like, understand that logic, that you're not being greedy. But number 2, how do you systematize it to where it happens automatically?
I think the other important part is, like, from a psychological standpoint, as an owner, this is like the big step. Like, and again, let's talk about sub $5 million businesses where it's been like blood, sweat, and tears. Is like as owners, we're too connected to our client, right?
Good point.
And we're too connected. So we're like, oh, Mrs. Smith, if she calls me, I knew her when I was a kid. Like all these things, and like, and really, this is gonna sound terrible, but it's just the truth. It's like we shouldn't know our customers as a CEO. Like the customers need to be part of they need to be a number, let's say, and they're just a customer, right? And I know it sounds terrible, but that's it. But psychologically, you start to go, oh, well, what if Mrs. Smith, who's been with us for 30 years, cancels? Good. What if she doesn't though, right? And so I can give you story after story after story of quadrupling pricing, going back historically to these customers that are 10 years old that have never raised prices and brought them all the way to market value with very limited like churn. But no, I mean, people are obligated to do this. Like we're obligated. To your point, like companies they go out of business. Like, so over the last, call it 24 to 30 months, for our clients, we're involved in a lot of the acquisitions of sub $1 million companies, right? I think we've been involved in 120 transactions in the last like 2.5 years, 2.5 to 30 months. And I would tell you this, in almost every situation, it's that. In almost every situation, it's a small business or mom and pops who started to financially struggle. They didn't know how to get out of it, and the company needs to sell. And frankly, what's the very first thing we do? And like honestly, we acquire the business. We pay a fair rate for whatever that business is. The businesses don't have a ton of value because they don't have their numbers aren't right. We bring them over, we get them integrated, and we immediately raise all the prices. Right. And then what do? We pull all the value out of the business immediately. Yeah. And we do it over and over and over again. And the only reason I'm saying it isn't because like what we're doing is great or special. The reason I'm saying it is that, to your point, they should be doing that ahead of time.
That's right.
And they would never be in the problem they were in today. And we would never be able to buy them for what we buy them for.
Absolutely. And look, it's a reactive thing if we're doing that. That's why I love this subject. And hopefully our listeners get value out of this because they can learn from my mistakes and others' mistakes, and it's not too late to make changes. You know, I would say one of the first places to start, if I'm an owner operator with one or two guys or just myself, I've been doing this for 10 years. You know, like maybe we started looking at going to a monthly billing credit card subscription model, because I know number one, with software, it's easier to go in and make that change. And if we disassociate payment with the service performed, now pay us versus like pay monthly, and you disassociate those two. And when we're doing price increases, it's not bait and switch. It's not being deceptive to the customer, but it's really making it easier for all parties involved. Is it not?
It's 100 times easier. 100 times easier. And here's the thing, like, you know, we can use all the adages we want, but like, dude, everyone's already doing it. Like everyone's doing it in every other industry. And so if you're not, you're actually behind the times. Like you're behind the times. Like I would happily have every single thing in my life on like some sort of membership fee, right? Like so I don't have to think about anything. Like even my landscaper today, like this is my house. He's like, well, we only accept check because we don't pay the credit card fee. And I was like, listen, you know, dude, like I spend a lot of money on my landscaping. And I'm like, you know how hard it is for me to figure out how to get my wife to go write you a check? Right. Like, dude, like, yeah, I'm gonna be delinquent because like I don't even know if we own any checks, right? Like, you know what I mean? Right. And like that guy could double my price, put me on a credit card today, and I would never even think twice about my price.
And then people get hung up like, well, I'm a 3% fee. I'm gonna make the customer pay that. Let's just build it into our model, right? Yep. Build it into our model. What else? As we wrap up on this, and what else as it relates to maybe the pricing? You know, again, if we can get good financials, we know our numbers. Ultimately, it's going to help us be more profitable. In my opinion, it's also going to help us hire the best people out there because we can pay them well. We're doing it strategically. We're not just doing it on a whim. We can take care of our families. You know, we're not having to go do some stupid price increase 5 years from now, and we're in a tough financial situation. Also, when we want to sell our businesses, if we're priced appropriately, that's the difference between a business maybe worth $500,000 or $50,000. I mean, you've probably seen that sort of gap. I mean, let's talk about that real quick as we wrap up. From a valuation standpoint, let's say you've got a guy that's doing, let's just say $250,000. You know, it's $500,000. Nothing crazy big out there. It's maybe himself and one or two technicians. Yep. Where do you see valuations on implementing the things we've talked about? Low to high end, like what makes a company worth more? Yeah,
and there's and we're in a little bit of a turbulent market right now, right? But like we have bought businesses. Let's just use $500,000 as an example. So we have bought a $500,000 recurring revenue pest control company that's 100% recurring revenue. In the last 12 months, we bought them for $100,000. Okay. Now you're going, well, that's crazy. That's crazy. That's crazy. No, it's because they weren't priced correctly. Their data was bad. But ultimately they were okay. Right. Yep. We've also bought a $500,000 company for $1.8 million. Yeah. Right. And so where it was dialed in, their pricing was better than ours. The systems were better than what we were building into. And we were actually buying a capability, even though they were a small business, right? Now, that's a little bit unusual to see them sell for that kind of a multiple, but our client bought it. And so that's a huge swing. So 100,000 to 1.8 million on the same amount of revenue.
That's generational, wealth.
Yeah.
That could be created or lost for not maybe paying attention to some of these details, right?
Yeah. And so, but there's a lot. And so, a lot of this data is out there, but I look at pricing. Pricing is a big driver for me. To your point, like if I look at these businesses, and the M&A guys would disagree with me, and that's okay. They would, and that's okay. But I look at pricing. I look at pricing usually is one of the first things I look at, and because if you think about the seat that I sit in, what's my job? My job isn't sell the business and then it goes away, and there's no problem with that. It's a lot of people's businesses. My business is, hey, our client needs to buy this company. Okay, how do I how do I get the right price so that we can extract the most value and ultimately buy EBITDA cheap? That's what our goal is. And so that's what I want to do. And so when I look at pricing, and it's a huge driver, man. And so to answer your question, these swings are gigantic. We've also seen companies recently who do millions of revenue who are unsellable because of the things we've talked about. So recently, we have a business that we've worked with, and there's a lot of problems with this company. We got brought in to basically save them from going out of business. We got them to profitability, huge issues. And the business is actually unsellable today because they want to sell too soon. So the business looks good, profitable. In the future, it's going to be able to be sold, but they want to sell today and they can't. No one wants to make an offer on them because all the other stuff's still out of line.
Right.
And so you think, $12 million business, that's worth 30 million, right? Whatever it may look like, but it's worth nothing right now. Sure, nobody wants to buy it.
Absolutely. How does someone learn more about, where do they start? Obviously, FRAXN, that's who we personally have our bookkeeping and accounting with. Where does someone start if they're not, doing this? Where do you go? Yeah, in the easiest sense, right? Not to pitch our products, but they can learn this from Pest Daily. We have 99% of what we've talked about inside of our e-learning software. It's there. The other thing, there's lots of good industry stuff. I think NPMA's got a lot of this stuff. I think the one thing that I would tell somebody is if they're going to go learn from people who've actually been there, done that. Not just talk to your buddy. Not go to a Facebook group that has a bunch of people complaining and the loudest guy wins. There's a lot of bad data out there, just a ton of bad data. But I would say if somebody wants to learn the finance side, they can go to Pest Daily. They can, FRAXN's got a ton of information. They can go to, Border and Buzz, the historic editions, some of the other accounting companies in our industry. They put good information out there. And I think that that's all perfectly fine. I think that if they start wanting to get into the operational stuff, they can reach out to our business. I think we kind of stand alone in what we do, but they can reach out to us. They can go. We have tons of free stuff out there too. So I think those are really, really good. Yeah, I would say start with the Facebook group, right? The Pest Daily group.
It's good.
What a great resource to go in and post a question or search questions.
And it's moderated,
right? Yeah,
that's a moderated group. So
that's awesome, man. I appreciate you having me here.
Yeah, man.
Love the spot. I don't know. I may spend the night here. I don't know. Is that allowed or not? But
yeah,
this is great. Thanks for having me. Thanks for dinner last night. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for not just me personally in our company, but for everybody in the industry. I think it's creating opportunity for people to see our industry, not as it has been in the last 50 years, but as it can be. And you're making a difference here. So, man, I appreciate it.
Dude, that's the kindest words I've ever heard, man. So thank you so much. I appreciate you doing this, man.
Absolutely, man. Appreciate it.
Take care, man.
Yes, sir.